get started. So hello and welcome everyone to the League's webinar series, where today we're going to be talking about the landmark case of Navahine versus the Hawaii Department of Transportation and what that means for advocates for active transportation across the nation. My name is Marley Townsend and I am the League of American Bicyclists Communication Coordinator. We, the League, find this story and this case particularly compelling both for its roots in youth-led climate action, as well as the settlement's implementation, which stands out as a way to not only incentivize, but require state DOTs to take action for active transportation like biking and walking as a way to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and protect our climate for future generations. So before we dive any deeper, I want to give a quick debrief on who and what the League is. So our full name is the League of American Bicyclists, and we are the largest and oldest grassroots bike advocacy organization in the nation. We have been around for a long time. We started out originally advocating for the first paved roads so that cyclists could ride more safely, and we're still leading the advocacy space today. Our mission is to lead the movement to create a bicycle-friendly America for everyone. And of course, that work is done in collaboration with a wide variety of organizations and individuals across the country. And we're really proud to have people here with us today who are doing that work in Hawaii. Before we get into the speakers, just a few quick reminders. This session is being recorded and will be added to our YouTube channel. You can also find this recording and all the others in our archive at bikeleague.org/webinars. Closed captions are available, so don't hesitate to turn those on. And all attendees are muted currently, but we do want your questions. So please type those into the chat or the Q&A at any point, and we will go through those during the Q&A portion of today's webinar, as many questions as we have time for. So let's get to know our speakers. We have some really awesome speakers with us today, and I'll introduce them kind of one by one briefly before they go into their presentations. Following the presentations, we will have a moderated Q&A session. So again, feel free to drop those questions in the chat. So let's talk about our speakers. First up, we're going to hear from Joanna Zeigler, an attorney for Our Children's Trust, which is a nonprofit public interest law firm that provides legal services to youth from diverse backgrounds to secure their legal rights to a safe climate. As a staff attorney for Our Children's Trust, Joanna is working on OCT's litigation for several state cases, including Navahine versus Hawai'i DOT. In her free time, Joanna enjoys surfing, hiking, walking her dogs, lifting weights, and anything else involving outdoor adventures. And personally, I'm hoping cycling is next. Following Joanna, you're going to hear from Michael Replogle, who is principal and owner of Replogle Consulting. Michael provided expert witness testimony for the Navahine case. He is an internationally recognized expert and advisor in the field of sustainable transport with a really extensive list of accolades. So just to name a few, he's founder and director emeritus for the Institute of Transportation and Development Policy, former deputy commissioner for policy at the New York City Department of Transportation, co-founder of the Partnership on Sustainable Low Carbon Transport, and former transportation director at the Environmental Defense Fund. So definitely an expert. Following Michael, you'll hear from Eduardo Hernandez, the advocacy director at the Hawaii Bicycling League. Eduardo works closely with community stakeholders, government agencies, and other advocacy groups to identify opportunities to improve cycling infrastructure and policies, address barriers to cycling in Hawaii, as well as support broader efforts towards safer streets for all users. So we're really excited to see how the Hawaii Bicycling League will be leaning in to help realize the change that the Navahine settlement envisions. We also have a special message from youth plaintiff Charlotte M. Unfortunately, she couldn't join us today because it is 9 a.m. in Hawaii and she's in school, but we're really grateful for the opportunity to hear from her via recording as part of Joanna's presentation. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Joanna.
Great. Thank you so much, Marley, for that introduction. And thank you all for having me today. It's such a great opportunity to speak to everyone. And just to clarify, I do bike. And so I'm excited to give this presentation to this group. I was located in Honolulu for many, many years, which is where I went to law school. I biked around Honolulu, and now am located in Eugene, where it's a very bike-friendly place, and we have this wonderful river path that I get to bike into the office on when I go in. So yeah, great to share this with all of you. I'm going to share my screen. Great. So as Marley mentioned, I am a staff attorney with Our Children's Trust, working on several of our state cases and including the Navahine case. Before I go into the specifics of the case, I'll just give you a quick background on Our Children's Trust. It's a nonprofit law firm, and we represent youth to support their fundamental right to a healthy climate system. And all of our lawsuits are based on three main goals. The first is that we bring science to the courtroom, and we believe in bringing the best available science about climate change in the lawsuits that we bring, which means as part of that, reducing carbon dioxide in the atmosphere to 350 parts per million for a safe climate. All of our lawsuits are powered by the voices of youth, and a huge part of these lawsuits is bringing the youth to a platform so that they are able to share their stories and about the harms that they're experiencing because of climate change. And then we believe that the judiciary must play a role in defining these youth's right to a safe climate. So we believe that youth deserve to be happy and safe, and we use our legal expertise to represent them, and the expertise of our experts, the scientific and technical expertise, so that they can tell their stories. So in bringing these lawsuits against governments, we're ultimately seeking to hold governments accountable for their role in exacerbating the climate crisis. All right, so let's dive into the Navahine case. This is a picture of all of us. There's 7 of the 13 youth plaintiffs in this picture, and then the legal team, Our Children's Trust, was co-counsel with the Earth Justice Office in Honolulu. And this is right before we're right in front of the state capitol, and we're about to go in and meet the governor and do a press conference announcing the settlement agreement, which I'll talk about more. So I love this picture because we're so happy. And this was supposed to be, we're supposed to be in trial on this day. So instead we get to smile for the camera and announce a really remarkable settlement agreement. So just a quick background on the case. As I mentioned, there were 13 youth plaintiffs. When the suit was filed, their ages ranged from 9 to 18 years old. And the plaintiffs are from across the Hawaiian Islands. So Hawaii Island, Maui, Molokai, Oahu, and Kauai. And the plaintiffs' claims assert that the state's operation of the transportation system results in high levels of greenhouse gas emissions, which violates their constitutional rights. So the 2 constitutional provisions that we brought this lawsuit under in the Hawaii Constitution, the first one's called the Public Trust Doctrine. And not all states have this in their constitution specifically, but Hawaii has a really protective public trust doctrine that requires the state to protect all natural resources for the benefit of present and future generations. And then the second provision in the Hawaii Constitution that we brought in our case was what's called the right to a clean and healthful environment. So along with these constitutional provisions, which is the basis of our case, we have a lot of statutes cited in our complaint that support these constitutional rights. And there's just 2 that are prominent in the case that I'll mention. The first is that Hawaii has a 0 emissions target, which requires the state to achieve 0 emissions by 2045. And then another provision in the state statute is it requires the transportation sector to decarbonize. So these are really prominent in the work that we do and supports that right to a clean and healthful environment. So we targeted the transportation sector specifically, and that's because the transportation sector was on this business as usual trajectory, and greenhouse gas emissions were becoming the lion's share of the state's emissions from transportation specifically. So you can see the red bar is the emissions from transportation. The X's are a lot of years when the state hasn't recorded its transportation emissions. But when you look at what it has recorded and then what's projected in the future, you can see that red bar increasingly grows as the majority of the emissions that are projected from the state. So along with this really great law and constitutional provisions, and we had our target in the government that we were going to protect, as we build our case, we get to engage amazing experts to help support our work. And this is a photo of several of the experts, I think eight, we had 10 total. This is 8 of them in this picture. You can see Michael up there. And instead of testifying at trial, all the experts got together and did an amazing panel presentation to describe the work that they did for these youth. All of the experts that we engage work pro bono because they're passionate about the message, and they're willing to support these youth in their case, which is just amazing. Just to give an idea of the types of topics the experts covered, we had experts explaining the science of climate change, explaining impacts that Hawaii specifically is experiencing because of climate change. We had a children's rights expert, an expert talking about the mental health impacts resulting from the climate crisis, including specifically on Native Hawaiians. And then also expertise in critiquing the actions of the Department of Transportation, which Michael will talk more about in just a few minutes. And then also transportation best practices and what HDOT was not doing to lower the emissions in the transportation sector. So this is, as Marley mentioned, I have a quick video from Charlotte, who is one of our plaintiffs who lives on Oahu. And as Marley mentioned, she's in school right now, so she was willing to record a short video just explaining her participation in the case and what the case means to her. And I will say she doesn't emphasize it so much here. She mentioned she rides her bike, but she has encountered, struggles of bike lanes and them not being available and feeling unsafe when riding a bike in certain areas. So that was part of actually her kind of motivation for joining this case.
Hi, I'm Charlotte. I'm 15 years old, and I'm one of the 13 plaintiffs in the Navahine versus Hawaii Department of Transportation case. I moved to Kailua from Sydney, Australia around 7 years ago now. Since moving here, I've been astounded by the amount of care and kindness people show each other in times of need. In Hawaii, the aloha spirit is very real, not to mention the sense of community that is present everywhere. In a small island such as Oahu, everyone knows everyone, which is probably one of my favorite aspects of living here. I love my hometown of Kailua. It's a small oceanside community that is very closely knit, and since I don't have my license yet, biking is my main mode of transportation. It's easy and convenient, not to mention that it doesn't create carbon emissions. Some of my favorite places to bike are the local Shave Ice Drop, Hikili Street, which has a lot of small boutiques and local businesses, and Target, which is pretty much the place to be. My bond to Kailua is strong, which is why it's so hard to see the effects of climate change that are occurring more and more. Over the years, large brown water events and flooding are becoming more and more common in Kailua. Brown water events occur when the nearby canal is either opened by excavators or floods over into the ocean naturally. Large amounts of water and rubbish that have been festering since the last open event are immediately transported into the ocean, and this often makes it unsafe and makes us unable to swim the ocean for up to a week. Flooding is also prevalent in my neighborhood, as the roads and drainage system were not designed to withstand very large amounts of rain. This can occasionally prevent me and my family from leaving our neighborhood when we need to. These events are getting more and more frequent unless we do something to prevent them, and that's why I joined the lawsuit. I originally heard about it from my friend Messina, who I'd done some various climate activism with before. But since I joined it, I thought that it was a really powerful way to take action when I started. And since I've joined it, I've loved being a part of something much bigger than myself. This case is so much more substantial than any other stand I've taken against climate change before. And after such a long journey with such incredible people, I was overjoyed when our lawsuit was settled. Initially, I thought, wait, does this mean we didn't get what we wanted? But I soon realized that we'd actually made it possibly even greater impact than we might have because we are working with Hawaii Department of Transportation instead of against it. So, after my journey, some advice for other youth who want to take action. No matter how young you are, you have the potential to make a difference. Don't ever doubt yourself based on ability, age, status, race, or any other thing that you think defines you. You have the power to make change, and especially as youth are taking more and more stands around the world, governments are realizing that since we are inheriting the earth, we have the right to stand up for it. Thank you for watching.
Yeah, so you can see just hearing the youth speak is really powerful, and it makes a difference in these cases, and they have such great insight. And it was really awesome going through this process with the youth from this kind of hardcore litigation that we were in. We were full steam ahead to trial. All of the youth were deposed and all of the experts were deposed, and they were feeling this momentum of like, okay, here we go. And then to sort of take a step back and start talking about settlement, they really approached it with this mature outlook of seeing that they were getting quite a bit from the Department of Transportation in the end. But it always feels like how she describes, well, are we settling? Are we giving up a lot? And I think most of the youth with their input and discussions really saw the benefit of this settlement in the end. And it was really neat. It's been neat to see their transition as well from this litigation into their continued activism with regard to climate change and implementing the settlement agreement. So we'll talk about a few key takeaways. The settlement agreement is quite comprehensive. The language, there's a lot of language in there about the rights of the youth, including their constitutional right to a clean and healthful environment. And the state ultimately in this settlement agreement has agreed to decarbonize the transportation system by 2045. So to do that, it is going to create a greenhouse gas reduction plan. And within the plan, there will be benchmarks that will be set in place for targets for greenhouse gas emission reductions. It will also implement key reforms to its budgeting and programming that will start to prioritize those projects that reduce greenhouse gas emissions rather than the business as usual projects that I know Michael will get more into that actually end up increasing greenhouse gas emissions. And then the state, the Department of Transportation has also committed to some really key immediate goals that revolve around electric vehicle charging infrastructure. And then particularly of interest for this group, the state has committed within the next 5 years to complete the bike network and the pedestrian network. So Michael will show some maps of what the network currently looks like, and the state has committed to completing that network, which is a really important step to promoting bicycling and to allow people to utilize bikes and feel safe and feel like they can get from A to B without incurring obstacles along the way. So it could completely transform the way that transportation and the dynamic of transportation looks on the island. And then it has created a specific unit within the department that will specifically be addressing climate mitigation. And it has already actually created that unit and hired some positions within it to start hitting the ground running. And then one final important aspect is in the settlement agreement, there's the creation of a youth council. And so this will give the youth an opportunity to be able to sit down at the table with the Department of Transportation periodically and provide input. And it's just remarkable to see when youth are given that opportunity, the ideas and the imagination and the creativity that comes with their giving that voice. And so we really look forward to seeing that in action and hopefully getting some other youth around the state involved and participating in that youth council. So this is just a fun graph showing this is what the red looks like if HDOT continued on its business as usual planning, and the blue is now what kind of impact the settlement agreement will have, which is 0 emissions by 2045. And then one other important aspect I'll just mention about the settlement agreement is that it allows for continuing jurisdiction of the court, which means that if there is a dispute between the parties about implementation of the settlement agreement, there's a few steps that we have to go through, and then we are able to just go to court and say, Judge, we have a disagreement, and the court retains oversight over implementation of the settlement agreement. So as I mentioned, this settlement agreement is just super comprehensive and an amazing outcome. It really shows what can happen when parties are willing to sit down at the table and discuss and come up with a solution. We like to say that this is all of the branches of government coming together, because we had the legislature there with the 0 emissions target, passing really important legislation in Hawaii. We had the executive branch willing to take a step back and sit down with the youth and figure out a solution to the lawsuit. And then the judiciary is there as a backstop to make sure that the settlement agreement is enforced. So with that, I'll stop. I know we're limited on time, and I'll pass it off to Michael for the next part of the presentation.
Great. Well, it's a pleasure to be with you all today and to talk about this landmark case that we achieved. And I am looking for my PowerPoint to restart it here. There we go. And of course, just at this moment, my computer shows the spinning wheel. There we go. Okay. So I want to talk about the role that I played in this settlement as an expert witness. I've been an expert witness in a number of other cases, but this was more large-scale initiative than I've participated in before, in terms of really pushing on state constitutional law to make progress on climate change. And we had, I think, a remarkable opportunity here. And my background that lent itself well to being an expert witness, particularly I served as Deputy Commissioner for Policy for the New York City Department of Transportation for 6 years until 2021. And we pushed through a lot of really important progress on sustainable transport, dramatically increasing cycling, dramatically reducing the number of people killed in the traffic system, especially vulnerable road users like pedestrians. And then I also did a lot, we did a lot of work in New York on reducing greenhouse emissions in our transport sector in a concerted way. And we also had the precedent in New York of identifying why it's important to sometimes settle litigation against a major transportation agency as a way to move forward rather than spending a lot of resources fighting about things. So I brought that experience of settlement of an Americans with Disabilities Act suit against New York City DOT into my expert contribution here in Hawaii, and suggested that approach could be promising in Hawaii as well. And thankfully, the state DOT seemed amenable to that approach, and our great legal team was able to pursue the opportunity to the conclusion that we've obtained. I've done a lot of work in a lot of other places trying to promote sustainable transportation, and I've seen cities around the world go from being very car dependent to being significantly less car dependent, and working from being more traditional transportation agencies that are focused on just moving vehicles to being agencies that are focused first and foremost on safety and the environment and the welfare of communities. And so I brought all that experience to this case. My expert report to the court had really half a dozen key points of focus. First, that state DOTs are not really just one more stakeholder in the transportation system. They're really in the driver's seat to shape greenhouse gas emissions for the state because they set the overall transportation plan for the state under federal law, and they play a very deep role in metropolitan transportation planning and in allocating money, both from the federal government and from state government, to deal with mobility issues across the state. Hawai'i DOT, it was clear when I came in and took a look at this. I'd been to Hawaii half a dozen times over the last decades. It's a place I've loved to travel to and have long seen as not living up to the promise of being a place where it could be really easy to move by, especially cycling, because the climate is so ideal for it. And it could have very great public transport because a lot of the towns are fairly linear along the coast or along the mountain ridges. And it's been very car dependent as it's been developed. And Hawai'i DOT, despite these state laws that have been passed and despite the Constitution, has perpetuated car dependence, greenhouse emissions, and traffic growth. My report talked about how Hawai'i DOT has a role in administering and identifying opportunities to reduce traffic and greenhouse emissions instead of promoting traffic growth, but that they failed time and time again to do that over the many years of activity that I reviewed in my expert review. Their investment plans and actions could be reoriented, and I showed how this could be done, and that ultimately this agency is one that could transform its activities, but wasn't doing anything in that direction. Hawaii has adopted goals for reducing greenhouse emissions and VMT at the state level through legislative action. But, and you can see these actions go back to 2018 and 2021. And yet Hawai'i DOT by 2024 still was taking very, very few actions to implement all of this. Over the years, a number of agencies, including the Hawaii Climate Commission, on which Hawai'i DOT participates, issued various recommendations for how Hawaii transportation needed to be reformed. And Hawai'i DOT was continuing to ignore those recommendations, which were well articulated in a VMT reduction toolkit, investing in transportation choices. That report, in fact, identified a whole set of recommendations for the state DOT to develop and track vehicle miles of travel and to measure the impacts of projects on vehicle miles of travel, to look at induced travel demand, to look at how funds might be realigned to support policies to reduce traffic growth and support mode shift. And the Hawaii Climate Commission, again, with the DOT participating, basically said, no, so far we haven't made any progress on any of these things. And in fact, the data shows that Hawai'i DOT, even to this day, continues to plan for 10% growth in VMT over the next 8 years and has been encouraging traffic growth for many years. And that the mode share used by people to travel, in this case, looking at work travel, which is easier to measure, shows that, more than 2/3 of all trips in Hawaii for journey to work are by drive alone, and transit and walking each occupy a very small share, 4 or 5%, and biking about 1%. And the drive alone share has been eroding the sustainable transport mode share about 1.3% per decade. So things are continuing to move in the wrong direction. And we see that Hawai'i DOT road expansion has been inducing more traffic and greenhouse gas growth. In fact, the Climate Commission looked at HDOT road expansion projects and found that using reasonable approximation methods, that the planned road expansion projects of Hawai'i DOT would increase emissions, CO2 emissions equivalent to almost 1/5 of the current transportation emissions in future years. The Hawaii legislatures also set standards for transportation networks in law, saying that the state DOT shall develop and implement a plan to establish a contiguous network connecting communities with other modes, and with reducing conflicts between modes, giving priority and preference to public transportation on many roadways, giving priority and preference to bicycle and electric bicycle highways or pathways that are as much as possible separated and protected from vehicle traffic, and to do the same for pedestrian highways and pathways. But again, Hawai'i DOT to this day continues to disregard these legislated network standards. We spent a lot of time in preparing the expert testimony for this case, looking at following the money. And this is something that I would encourage advocates across the country who are interested in reforming your state DOT. The first place to start is follow the money. Look at where the money's being spent in the state transportation budget. Look at the allocation of federal transportation funds to different projects. There's some studies in various places. There's one study by Natural Resources Defense Council in looking at California data, classifying projects as to whether they increase or decrease vehicle miles of travel or are neutral with respect to that. And we adapted that technique that they had put together to look at Hawaii transportation projects. And I, as an expert civil engineer and traffic engineer, made expert decision about each project in the budget over an 11-year period of the state budget data, and showed that basically about 1/3 of the total project spending will boost vehicle miles of travel, and only 4% will likely cut vehicle miles of travel. The state DOT is basically spending the money on projects that'll move traffic faster, whether it's a road widening or it's an intersection improvement to add turning lanes or other kinds of initiatives. And the state has made glacial progress on investing in pedestrian infrastructure, despite having a longstanding pedestrian plan statewide. You can see the number of crosswalks is pretty much constant. The sidewalk path miles is pretty flat in the state system. And glacial progress in building the Hawaii bicycle network, which at one point, 25 years ago, Hawaii had a bike network plan that called for building well over 1,000 miles of bike lanes across the state. And now the bike plan's been shrunk dramatically, and the state has made glacial progress in meeting even that shrunken plan, as this graph shows. And Hawai'i DOT is continuing to plan for deficient network standards for shoulder bike lanes, not for preferred protected paths. And Hawai'i DOT and the Hawaii Climate Commission, their own research, in fact, has shown that Hawaiians prefer to use shared use paths or side paths or separated bike lanes, and don't like to use shoulder lanes or wide or unprotected bike lanes, that these really provide little comfort. And in fact, you can look at a map of the network that's in the current Hawaii bike plan. This is for the island of Oahu, and you can see all the stuff that's shown here in blue. These are bike lanes. The green, which is pretty scarce here, is paths or protected bike lanes. And the red is shared shoulder or shoulder bikeways or shared roadways. And you can see that the majority of the plan is to build shared road or shoulder bikeway as the plan is built out. And the same thing is true here, even more so on Maui. And then the similar things are found on Kauai, which is almost entirely shared road or shoulder bikeway. So the standards in Hawaii here are a major problem. Here, the big island of Hawaii, which has almost no facilities to date built and would be built solely for shared road or shoulder bikeways. So what do these look like? Well, this is one shared roadway. And I guess the big question is, would you feel comfortable taking your family out on a bike trip on a road like this with a, share the road bike sign being your really only protection against traffic that's moving at a very fast pace on an unsafe facility? Or here on this shoulder bikeway, which gives you no protection from very fast moving traffic on a high-speed open road with no signals, signage, or physical barriers at intersections, just some paint on the road and a speed limit of 35. And we all know most people are driving 40 or 45 on a road like that, which makes it a pretty unsafe cycling facility. And we've seen public transportation fare really no better under HDOT's stewardship and planning than bicycles or pedestrians. And HDOT actually in their long-range transportation plan, the last one that was adopted said, well, transit ridership has declined by 50 or 75% on a number of these islands in the last 5 years. But that's like modest, and then making no remarks about that. So just really no concern expressed by the state DOT that the collapse of the public transportation, the bus system generally, might impair the operation of the overall transportation system. If there's one thing you need to do to protect and reduce greenhouse emissions, it's give people choices to walk, to bike, to take public transportation, and then to electrify the remaining part of the travel system. And HDOT's kind of, up to this date, hasn't been paying too much attention to all of those details. And it was continuing business as usual approaches up until this settlement. So I think the settlement is a great accomplishment for Hawaii and for the environment. HDOT has pledged by April of next year a transport sector decarbonization plan with many more details. And for reform of HDOT planning and programming and monitoring and administration, which should begin to move the money away from road expansion projects and to other projects that will reduce greenhouse emissions and vehicle miles of travel. And with revisions to the statewide transportation plan, which is due next year, again, a continuing challenge will be following the money and following what is often a very opaque budget process. I think it will be a key challenge to get Hawai'i DOT to revise the statewide bike plan facility standards as that plan is implemented, so that it's not building out facilities that really don't do much to encourage cycling, like the examples I showed, but instead building a system that is very attractive for people from ages 8 to 80 to use to get around the island of Hawaii. And then looking for progress in advancing complete streets and Vision Zero frameworks for traffic safety, to make it attractive to walk and to bike, and to learn from best practices in places across the US and across the world, which Hawaii could use as models as it adapts to develop a sustainable transport network for the future. So with that, I will stop. Thank you.
Thank you. And now we'll pass it over to Eduardo.
Aloha and good afternoon. I want to thank my panelists for bringing this data to the fore and elevating this conversation. And thanks to the League for convening us together. These are really exciting times. And let me just go into my short presentation, and I will expand my screen. And as I said, on behalf of the Hawaii Bicycling League, we are just so in awe and thankful for the plaintiffs, the brave young plaintiffs who took on this work. We've been around since 1975, and we've been asking for a lot of the a lot of the things that have come out of this settlement, but oftentimes we've gotten, oh, thank you, thanks for letting us know, we'll look into that. You know, we haven't made progress in terms of that kind of, you know, getting the court order to support what our Constitution calls for and what our laws call for. At Hawaii Bicycling League, we focus on advocacy, education, and events. And that's what we've been doing since 1975. And we, in the advocacy pillar, we've really focused on complete streets and Vision Zero, which as was alluded to earlier in the program, we have great laws in Hawaii. And some of these include, we have a 3-foot passing law, we have a vulnerable road user law. In 2006, in the city and county of Honolulu, we had a charter amendment to call for a more pedestrian and bike-friendly city. We have a Safe Routes to School committee that's backed with $20 million of funding that's standing up now. Vision Zero and Complete Streets are both at the state level and the county level. And yet, as Michael mentioned, it's just, these are great laws, but we haven't seen dramatic change in the infrastructure. On our education side, we've been doing youth bike education, where we bring on-bike instruction to 4th graders across Oahu. We've been doing this for 35 years. We serve about 8,000 students each year, as well as a wide range of cycling workshops for adults, including talks to motorists, including look, going in the picture on the right, you can see Roberts Hawaii. We've worked with their drivers to better understand how to share the road. So we're all across the state doing education around bicycling, and then we lead some of the largest events, bicycling events in the state. And these include one we just had this weekend, the Honolulu Century Ride. We had just about 1,300 riders that we took across varying distances up to 100 miles, some of the most beautiful scenery in the country. But some of I was out supporting the route, and I was kind of holding my breath a little bit. Luckily, everyone made it back safely. And we definitely have room to improve our roads and better share our roads so that people can choose to ride, because we have just such a great opportunity for riding. If you ever come to Hawaii and you want to go for a bike ride, please reach out and contact us. We'd love to. We have some bikes we can share and bring you to show you some of the infrastructure that we have on island. We do have here on Oahu, we have a bike share program that's actually one of the most popular in the country on a per capita basis, Beaky. So we're just incredibly excited for what this settlement means, being able to build the relationships that we've had to date with the state and with the counties and with the visitor industry to really elevate opportunities for people to ride more safely. So I definitely encourage you to come visit us. If you come in April, it's join us for the Haleiwa Metric Century, and in September for the Honolulu Century Ride. And thanks again so much to my panelists and to the League for inviting me today.
Thank you, Eduardo. That was awesome. So now we're going to go into just kind of the moderated Q&A portion of the webinar. So I have a list of questions to go through. And my first one, I think, is best suited for Joanna, because it's about how the 13 youth plaintiffs got organized. How did they get started? Who did they reach out to you? What did that look like?
Yeah, it's a combination of lots of different ways. As you saw in Charlotte's video, she said she had spoken with a friend, Messina. Messina was one of the original youth that reached out to Our Children's Trust and was a big part of getting the case going. And so Charlotte, being one of her friends, heard about it from her and joined. And for those on the call that are in Hawaii, you know, it's a small place, and it's you know, a lot of things travel by word of mouth. So that was really the means by which we sort of reached out to youth, and youth came to us. And it's just sort of an organic process of you know, making sure we have good representation, but also honoring the folks that want to join. And yeah, and it just came together like in an organic way.
Awesome. So my next question, I think Michael might have slightly answered, but so it's if someone was looking to do something like this in their state, how would they get started? And the answer, I think, is follow the money. But how do you do that? Where do you start? Oh, you're muted.
Yes, I think that you have to start where you are. That's kind of first and foremost. If you're an organizer, get a good grounded take on just what your current situation is, so you don't get out over your skis. But you know, following the money is a really good place to start. Look at where the money is getting spent on transportation projects, where the money's coming from and where it's going and what the impacts are. Look also at and you can look at these things at the state level. You can also look at the metropolitan level and add those metropolitan level plans up and see how they nestle with the state. Sometimes there's some conflict there. And then take a hard look at the legal requirements of the agencies. Hawaii is blessed with some very good laws on transportation, which have been observed in the breach. And so I think that creates a situation in Hawaii where you can point a clear problem between the laws being articulated here and the actions don't have any bearing on what the law has said. Another place to look, though, is, and this, we spent a lot of time in my 80-page expert report to the court on this case, looked at a lot of the federal guidance that's been issued by the Federal Highway Administration, the National Academy of Sciences, Transportation Research Board, and groups like that, and a U.S. General Accounting Office report looking at how state departments of transportation can make effective actions to reduce their greenhouse gases and reduce their traffic growth, because there are best practices around the country. And US DOT has organized a number of workshops, trainings, and other resources over the years. And this goes back more than a decade. That has created a very large body of evidence that can, and in the case of Hawaii, was cited to the court as things that This is advice that's been given to the State Department of Transportation. We could even document the ways in which the state DOT had participated in some of these processes and had in fact commented that, yes, they're looking at these recommendations, and yes, they admit they have only done a few of these list of things that are recommended that state DOTs do if they're going to reduce greenhouse emissions. So that's an audit that can be done in any state. Look at what your state DOT has done in responding to the various recommendations from the federal government and other expert agencies in this arena, and put a spotlight on that, because that gives you another place to get some traction around this. And then finally, look at the granular level, such as, looking at the adequacy of implementation of the bike network plans and the pedestrian network plans. Look at the disconnects between the safety goals and actual practice. I mean, many states are planning for increases in the number of people killed in the traffic system every year, rather than looking to and planning to reduce the number of people killed in the traffic system. This is an obvious place where greenhouse gas policy and safety, public welfare policy need to connect, because an unsafe transportation system for vulnerable users is a system that will increase greenhouse emissions by forcing more car dependence. So these are all action points that you can also then use to mobilize public opinion, and mobilize local and state elected officials to your side to help make change.
Speaking of public opinion, I'm curious, how has the public received the news about the settlement? Are they excited? Is there any skepticism? This is kind of for all the panelists, really.
I think I think we're excited initially. I think there's not a lot known yet on behalf of the broader public, because things are still getting into place. I've shared it like this weekend at our Century Ride. I was talking about it with people, and a lot of people didn't know that this settlement had happened. So they were excited to hear about it. And we're certainly want to, as you said earlier, we want to do everything we can to lean in, to lend our weight, to share this with our members, and keep the momentum going, because we do know that we do have to keep our eye on DOT.
Which is a great segue. Oh, sorry. Continue.
I was just going to add onto Eduardo's comment that now the real work begins, right? We came to this amazing agreement, but as Eduardo mentioned, we'll have to pay attention. And so part of, I think, our goal moving forward is to start to have more of an education component to settlement implementation. There's going to be some kind of key moments throughout the next 21 years, and especially in the next year, with regard to certain things that the HDOT will be producing, namely the greenhouse gas emissions plan is coming out in May 2025. And there is a public comment period that will take place before that. So moments like that, getting the youth council organized, things like that, we'll be really working on incorporating that education and public awareness component to implementation, because it will take the community, and it does. Anything like this, of course, is going to have some concern associated with it from certain members of the public. So it's really going to be important to not only spread the word about the settlement agreement, but explain why it's so important. So when maybe some road capacity is lessened because we're adding bike lanes or sidewalks, or whatever the case may be, and that might be not something somebody wants, or emphasizing EV charging networks when folks aren't used to that, that's when it's important that we all work together to really start educating people and emphasizing why all of these actions are really important, for not only just for clear air, which Hawaii has a lot of because of the trade winds, but really thinking about the future and these youth and making sure that we're doing everything we can to protect the island and make it a safe place for everyone. So yeah, so that's the next step is getting the education component out there.
Nice. So what's the plan for tracking the DOT's progress on meeting their commitments, and what happens if they don't?
Yeah, so we have, like I said, certain benchmarks built into the settlement agreement for example, the greenhouse gas reduction plan. So as these benchmarks come around, we will be paying attention, getting the word out, especially when public comment periods are available. Also, with the bike plan commitment and the bike network commitment, we'll be wanting to make sure we're monitoring what the DOT is planning and what the bike lanes look like and that sort of thing. So that's all, coming up in the future and just making sure we monitor. As far as big violations or big benchmarks that aren't met, as I mentioned, the court has retained jurisdiction over the settlement agreement, meaning for the next 25 years, this case is technically open, not to continue litigation, but to monitor the settlement. So we can go through non-court processes to try and resolve the differences if we feel like parts of the settlement are not being met. But in the end, we do have that avenue to go back to court.
Awesome.
Yeah,
So,
and
and
I think it's important too that this settlement agreement includes, as part of the low carbon, the transport decarbonization plan, is to include targets for every 5 years out to the decarbonization in 2045. And with annual reporting by the state DOT on progress towards those 5-year benchmark goals for reducing greenhouse emissions. The settlement agreement also includes a commitment to adopt traffic reduction goals, a VMT reduction goal, not articulated exactly what it will be, but I think keep an eye for that too, and look for the annual reporting opportunities around that. And then there'll be opportunities also to see how the statewide transportation plan in 2025 evolves from the past plan in terms of moving some money, and then how the state DOT moves in adopting new and more effective appraisal tools to evaluate the impact of both individual projects and the total plan on greenhouse emissions and traffic growth. Those are all part of the jigsaw puzzle that will flow out from this settlement. And hopefully the plaintiffs, with putting some pressure on the state, will be in fact able to see that jigsaw puzzle assembled in a way that gets to the end goal.
thank you. So we're almost out of time here, so I'm just going to ask one last question. So Michael showed us the different like bike plans and bike networks and kind of how they're not planning for the utmost safety of the people who want to be using those roads. So how do advocates, or maybe just your everyday person, how could we influence that? How could we change those standards? What can we do?
Yeah, so within the Department of Transportation, in the mitigation section or unit that was just created, there is a complete streets person who's devoted to that and is actually quite passionate about complete streets and completing the networks. And so I think just monitoring as especially in the next 5 years as HDOT puts out plans for different bike different parts of the bike network to pay attention, to make sure to comment if it doesn't seem like they are putting in the infrastructure that's going to be keeping folks safe. I say that and with the hope that that's not going to happen, because they're well aware of the situation and the poor planning that has happened in the past with regard to bike lanes and the infrastructure that needs to be put in place to ensure a safe network. And so completing a bike network is not, I guess, the same as just painting a bicycle on the road and saying that we're good to go. So, but yeah, it's always important to just pay attention, and as these plans come out, to make sure that we're commenting and making sure they're fulfilling that commitment.
Excellent. Any final thoughts before we sign off for the day?
I mean, I think it would be great to see, as part of the discussions that flow from the Youth Council, a short list of, early asks for the state DOT, one of which could be revising the design standards for cycleways in the state of Hawaii, so that wide shoulder lanes, and painted paths basically are not included as legitimate bicycle facilities as part of the state bike plan, recognizing that you need to have separation. If you're having a bike facility on any roadway that has significant traffic speeds and volumes, and that, shared facilities with cars only make sense if it's a slow street, where you've got equal rights for cyclists and pedestrians and motor vehicles.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for taking the time here to share your expertise with this audience. Yeah, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I hope all of you on this webinar are gaining some inspiration from this, and take some of these lessons and opportunities to heart, and put them to work in your communities, whether you're in Hawaii or some other part of the country or the world, because there's so much work to be done. We've got to roll our sleeves up and get the job done now. So,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Aloha.
Aloha. Malaha.